Regrettably, it comes as no surprise that with a Democrat in the White House press briefing has once again become nothing more than a propaganda machine, where the press is given their talking points and marching orders to which they will regurgitate endlessly all over the media. This happens even if a Democrat manages to get into the White House legitimately, unlike Joe Biden. But every so often, what happens in these press briefings is somebody decides, hey, let's actually act like a journalist for once and ask a real question, and push back on the Democrat narrative. And this question involves the tax hikes that is being proposed by Joe Biden. Now, this is one thing that Joe Biden was honest about on the campaign trail, in which he planned on hiking the taxes of every single American in the country, whether directly or indirectly. It is sad, but for some reason, some people thought, hey, let's actually vote for someone to take more of our money away from us, give it to government, and redistribute it to rich donors and Democrat supporters. Not the average person, but just the already millionaires and billionaires who will then use the money to partially fund programs that would advance left-wing priorities, but mostly take a cut off the top and send a lot of it back in campaign donations. Now, tax cuts under Trump benefited everybody. In fact, those people in the middle and lower class income got some of the best benefits out of those tax cuts, despite the Democrats' lies that it was tax cuts for the millionaires and billionaires. No, it wasn't. It was a tax cut for everyone, especially the middle class and lower income workers. Now, the Democrats, they plan on hiking taxes, and they hope, though, that they can market it as just a tax on millionaires and billionaires, and you're too stupid to figure out that it's actually a tax on you. Now, somebody asking this question in the White House press briefing, which is surprising. It is unsurprising that the response from the press secretary involved distorting the truth, half-truths, and blatant lies in the response. So let's go ahead and see how this played out in the press briefing.
The president's tax plans, he has said that individuals, households under $400,000 per year aren't going to see their taxes go up. Does that also apply to indirect effects from the corporate tax changes that might not technically be tax increases? Like if an average family of four making under that amount sees their heating bill go up because utility companies increase their rates to accommodate the 28% corporate tax rate. Is that okay or acceptable to the president? Because it's not technically a tax increase?
Well, I would say that there's no reason that is what needs to happen. We have evidence of what happens. Back in 2017, when Republicans prioritized tax cuts for big corporations over investing in working people, there were many arguments made about what the impact would be. The benefits would be passed on to consumers. They would invest in R&D. There would be jobs created. None of that happened. There were stock buybacks, more incentives to offshore, record compensation for executives. We have seen countless studies where the biggest impact to these corporations would likely be on capital. So I would say that's not a concern we have at this moment in time.
You see how easily she lies and distorts what actually happened with half-truths? So let's actually go through and take a look at what happened. One, we had an economic boom. Yes, we had an economic boom. Government revenue actually hit records with tax cuts because of increased economic activity. We had the lowest unemployment, especially among minorities. So jobs were actually created. Now, when she goes in and she talks about stock buyback, she thinks you're an idiot. The effects of the stock buybacks, corporations buying back outstanding stocks that they had previously released into the marketplace in order to raise capital. When they were buying that back, they were reducing the supply of that stock, which means if you had those stocks in your 401k and your IRA, the value of your retirement or the value of any investment, if you just had a regular investment that had those stocks in it, the value of that went up. So when the value of your 401k and IRA went up, the Democrats, they hated that. They hated that because the more you save for retirement and the more you become income independent at retirement, they hate that because then you are no longer dependent on Social Security, which means they can no longer use Social Security as a way to fearmonger you into being able to vote for them. So stock buybacks are actually beneficial to the working class with their retirement accounts. Yes. So it did benefit. So we had employment go up, right? More people had jobs. The values of their 401k went up. Companies did invest in R&D, and we had an economic boom, and the government received more money. Now she wants to go out there and act like that's a bad thing by going off and telling you what they did, but then leaving out the benefits to the country and to you, the average American consumer. Now, when it comes to tax increases, right, that hurts everybody. Because when you increase the corporate tax rate, what happens is companies raise their prices. They're still going to hit their profit margin. They're still going to say, hey, we want, to hit 5% profit on this particular merchandise. Right? So if they increase taxes, guess what? They're going to increase their prices because corporations don't pay taxes. You do. You're where the corporations get all their income from. Are you surprised? Maybe you haven't heard this before. But businesses get all their money from you, the consumer, buying their products and services. So when you put taxes on businesses, you're actually putting taxes on you, the consumer. And what are corporations going to do? If their taxes go up, their prices go up. And their prices go up immediately. And we're already seeing the negative impact of Democrats in charge. We've seen gas prices skyrocketing. We're seeing the cost of living going up already. And the Democrats want to increase taxes. Of course, they want to increase taxes because increasing taxes hurts you. And that's what the Democrats want, you to be suffering. Because the more you are suffering, especially financially, the more you become dependent upon the government, the more you become reliant on them, and you are less sure of your own ability to take care of yourself. So, of course, when it comes time for elections, what's going to happen? You no longer believe that you have the ability to be able to take care of yourself. You need the government to take care of you. And what party is willing to spend the most money from the government? Oh, of course, the Democrats. Only the lie that the con, I should say, that they forget to tell you is that the more you become dependent on them and the more money they dole out, the less valuable our money becomes. And therefore, the higher prices go up and it becomes an endless vicious cycle. Now, when it comes to tax cuts, the benefits of a tax cut are slower in coming about than the negative impact of tax increases because, one, corporations have already taken a look at the price and say, hey, you've already shown that you're willing to pay that, but maybe we'll drop prices just a little bit in order to increase demand. Maybe. But, because you were already paying the higher prices, they would be wanting to see whether or not you're willing to continue paying that higher prices. So every time taxes go up, costs go up. But whenever you reduce taxes, maybe, it doesn't come down because you were already paying it, or it doesn't come down right away until several things happen. Okay, you're understanding this. It takes longer for the prices to come down because they do start engaging in things like stock buybacks because they're trying to shore up their own finances first. They're trying to first get themselves in a position to be more financially stable so that when they do get to the point where they will lower prices, they can afford to do so because they are reducing their liability. And as they are reducing their liability, and which is another way of saying they are reducing their expenses, then they can bring down costs without sacrificing profit. Another thing here is as you start lowering taxes, you decrease the barrier of entry for competitors to enter the market. And as more competitors enter the market because they are able to financially afford to do so, competition happens. And competition brings down prices. That is something that they don't want you to know. And it takes time for the competition to get started, to get ready, to get through all the government red tape, to incorporate their business or do their LLC paperwork, get the business going, get the marketing out there, start building up a customer base for their goods and services. And then as they get bigger and bigger and start becoming more and more successful and competing with the bigger guys, then through competition, they enter a price war because they're trying to capture as much of the market as possible. See, that doesn't happen overnight. That takes time. Undoing the damaging effects of tax increases always takes longer than what the damaging effects of tax increases take hold. It's interesting how that happens, but they want to take, what we had seen where we were still in the process of benefiting from the tax cuts until, of course, the pandemic happened. China, thank you very much. And even then, because of the lower taxes and Operation Warp Speed, we were able to be in a position to get from outbreak to vaccine in less than a year and to distribution in less than a year, all thanks to President Trump. And yet, the Democrats think that good leadership is horrible and piss poor leadership is great. Anti-science is actually science in their world, but science is, whatever. Just like they think, being a racist is actually anti-racism. They do not use the same dictionary that the rest of us use. They do not use the same definition for the words in the English language that the average person would use. So maybe in their mind, they think they're telling the truth because they're just not letting you know that the definition of the words that they use are different. It's really quite amazing how they get away with that. So they're trying to sucker you into thinking that increasing taxes will be great. But yet, if you look throughout history, whenever taxes are increased, what happens? Employment goes down and revenue to the government goes down because economic activity decreases. But every time you have a tax cut, economic activity increases, employment goes up, wages go up, and government revenue goes up. If the Democrats really want to be able to spend all this money, then what they should be looking at is another tax cut in order to generate more economic activity, which then the government collects more money in taxes, even though it's at a lower tax rate. These people, they can't do math, they don't know science, and they don't live in reality. They don't seem to understand anything. Get them basic economics for idiots. All right, the complete idiot's guide to economics is what they need. Okay, going on, there's another clip here that I want to take a look at and discuss.
Biden-Harris White House wants to revive an Obama-era policy on zoning laws. Now, it gives the federal government undue influence over local property rights. It sounds boring, but it is very important because potentially it could impact your neighborhood. This is part of their $2.5 trillion infrastructure package. The allegation from Democrats is that zoning laws and single-family homes are, like everything else these days, racist. It is amazing, right, that they can't seem to get any bipartisan support on anything, while at the same time they're calling everyone and everything racist.
Yeah, that's right. Not only do the Democrats want to take more of your income through higher taxes and increased cost of living, but they want to destroy the value of your assets, such as your home. They want to be able to destroy your neighborhood. It's not only to try and set you back financially and being able to take away the value of what it is you can pass on to your kids after you're gone in order to bless the next generation so that they can live better than what we have. It is the goal of every parent to make sure that their parents are, it is the goal of every parent to make sure that their kids have a better life than they had growing up. But there is more to it than just trying to destroy the value of your property and what you have. Now, if you'll notice, these zoning laws that they are wanting to use to attack property rights and property values will never affect any of the homes in which the politicians live in, or any of the homes in which the millionaire and billionaires donors of the Democrats live in. It won't affect their communities. It will just affect everybody else's community. Because while, yes, they do seek to destroy you financially, they're not going to do anything that destroys themselves financially with it. So it's another situation in which, yes, they do it to you, but they're insulated from it. But there is more to it than that. It's also for the same reason in which they allow the riotings over the false narratives that they give to police shootings. Almost every police shooting narrative that they give us is false. And when the actual facts come out, we realize that the situation is nothing like what the media has described. Heck, we all know that George Floyd died of a drug overdose, and yet there's an officer on trial for the murder of George Floyd, who we all know through evidence didn't actually murder George Floyd or did not do anything that resulted in George Floyd's death, except maybe not recognize that George Floyd was showing signs of a drug overdose and getting an ambulance to rush him to the hospital in time. Maybe, but police officers are not trained medical professionals. So whether or not they should know what the signs of a drug overdose is questionable. But it's the reason why they go for the riots, and it's the reason why they engage in identity politics that they are using as the same motivation for why they are now attacking your property rights and wanting to destroy the value of your property. And that is to destroy any and all sense of community. See, single-family households represent communities. They do. Because what happens when you own a house, a single-family home? Well, first of all, because you own it, you want to take care of it. You do what you can to try and keep it and the value of it up. You want to keep your neighborhood clean because, let's face it, when you're just renting a property, you go there, you rent it, you don't really take care of it. You realize you won't get your security deposit back if you don't, but, you really don't care too much. You don't really care about the maintenance and upkeep because if things get bad, you just move to a new place. But when you actually own a property, and your only way to move is to sell it to somebody, you want to keep it looking good. You want to keep all the maintenance up to date. You want to keep the yard looking good. And because of that, you also have a vested interest in the community, the neighborhood. You also, I guess maybe the nosy neighbor that wants you to keep your property looking good, just like you want to keep them to keep their property looking good. But it's also because with the single family household and having a yard, what were the way things used to be in a single family home? Well, people tend to know their neighbors when their neighbors tend to stick around for decades, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years after buying a home. You tend to get to know your neighbors. You have conversations with them. You build community. And what happens? Being the guys that we are, we tend to get grills and we grill out and we want to invite the neighbors. The guys in the neighborhood get together for the grill out. The women in the neighborhood get together, talk, gossip, do whatever it is that women, talk and do. That's besides the point. But people tend to get to know their neighbors, but the more you get to know your neighbors, the more you realize that even if you disagree on certain policy issues, you realize that that person is not a horrible person. So it's very hard for the politicians to go out and say anybody who disagrees with you is a horrible, evil, racist person when you know somebody who disagrees with you and you know that they're actually a good, decent person because you talk with them. You've had grill outs with them. You've invited them over for beer and to watch the game. See, the more we actually build up communities, talk to each other, and talk to people who do disagree with us, have different opinions, the more we realize that they're not horrible, and the harder it is to drive a wedge in between us to do the Democrats' whole goal of divide and conquer, which is to keep us divided amongst each other, keep us, angry against each other, thinking that anybody who is different than us, who has a different opinion, who looks different, who's a different gender, if they're not in our box that the Democrats put us in, then they're horrible, evil people out to oppress us. That doesn't work when we actually have communities and get to know our neighbors. Now, if you're in an apartment complex, you generally don't get to know your neighbors. You don't have room for a grill to have a grill out and to invite people over. You don't have the space, the yard, the room for all of that. And this is where, as you notice, that in Democrat areas where there is high population, a lot of apartment buildings, a lot of, temporary residents at any location, where there is low, property ownership, you have breakdowns of community. You have the out of control riots that you see. You see people who are just on an instant notice, on a dime, ready to go out there and start burning buildings down. See, property ownership is the foundation of building community. Do you start to understand this? Do you start to realize that they have to destroy the civil society, and to destroy the civil society, you have to break down communities. And to be able to break down communities, you have to destroy property rights. You have to destroy the single family homes. And you have to build up, just multiple apartment complexes where nobody really knows their neighbors because their neighbors are coming and going all the time. I mean, I can tell you this from a guy's point of view, that if I have a neighbor, years ago, if I'm renting and I have, a neighbor, and I know that neighbor is, only going to be there a year, maybe 2 years, and then they're going to move and another person comes in, I'm not going to take the time to get to know them. I'm not going to invest time and energy into getting to know someone and trying to build up a friendship with someone who I know is just going to be gone, in under, 5 years, between 1 to 2 years is just going to be gone. Why spend the effort? But if I know that the person next to me is going to be there and is going to be my neighbor for the next, 10, 20, 30 years, I'm going to take the time to get to know them, have some conversations, get to know their likes and dislikes. And the more I communicate with them, the more I know what we have in common and what we have different. They can't have that. Because what the Democrats fear and hate most of all is we the people getting along. Unity is what the Democrats hate. Unity is the enemy of authoritarianism. And that's why the Democrats spend all their time trying to divide everybody, trying to spread hate, racism, sexism, to divide us in every way possible. Because the more we're fighting amongst each other, the less we're paying attention to them, and they run off with all the money, screw us over, and take away our rights and freedoms, with maybe half the population or 40% of the population cheering on their own oppression. Yay. So yes, of course, Joe Biden and the Democrats are trying to attack our property rights. They're trying to attack the value of our properties, just like they're trying to take away more and more of our income. Because for the Democrats, they want to kick you down, keep you down, instill as much pain as possible, and then try and convince you it was the other guy that did it. And the more financial pain they can inflict on you, the more you feel like you have to try and work, to put in overtime just to be able to afford, food, shelter, and utilities. And if you're distracted just trying to meet the needs or your basic needs of the day for you and your family, well, that's another situation in which you do not have time to pay attention to what they're doing. It's the same con that they've been running for decades now. And I'm surprised, quite frankly, that there are still a lot of people falling for this. There's still a lot of suckers out there that haven't caught on to the fact that the Democrat Party is just, sleazy con men. And it's also amazing that with the Democrats having been responsible for every moral stain and atrocity in American history, that they can still try and pull off this whole marketing plan or marketing idea that they're the party with that's on the right side of history. That they're the party of minorities, considering that they've been attacking and destroying minority communities since the founding of the Democrat Party. So I guess as long as they can just, say as often as they can the exact opposite of what they are without any challenge by the media, there's always going to be suckers that are going to constantly vote for them, vote for their own oppression, vote for their rights to be taken away, their income to be destroyed, and the value of their assets to be evaporated. It's amazing. I just can't understand how half the country is that flippin' stupid. All right, let's go on to the next clip and see what else is going on with the Democrats.
This is from Unusual Whale Stock on Twitter. Okay, so this is actually pretty significant. She just exercised 10 million in Microsoft shares that was back in mid-March. Then, lo and behold, Microsoft landed this blockbuster $22 billion contract with the military. This is related to their augmented reality headsets for their troops over the next decade.
Well, that is a perfect example of what I was talking about. How identity politics, the destruction of community, and trying to strip you of your income is all meant to keep you too distracted to pay attention to what they're doing. Now, what we see here is a blatant form of insider trading, where Nancy Pelosi had information and knowledge that the general public would not have as a result of her position. And as a result, she engaged in what apparently is insider trading in order to benefit and enrich herself. And you weren't paying attention, were you? Of course not. You were too busy trying to figure out how to keep food on the table because the Democrats keep kicking you down. This is the type of crap that they try to get away with every day. But most people do not realize it because of all the distraction of identity politics, keeping us divided against each other and just trying to meet our basic needs. They get away with this. This is a perfect example of me saying how by them keeping us divided, they're able to run off with all of the money, leaving us high and dry. Seemed pretty relevant to me to be able to bring this up. Now, will she be investigated? Will she suffer any consequences? Of course not, because the Democrats are not subjected to any laws. They created the two-tier justice system and the rigged economy specifically to be able to benefit themselves. They're a bunch of crooks. That's plain and simple. The Democrats are nothing but a bunch of crooks, lying thieves. And there isn't any doubt, everywhere the Democrats have full control, it's corruption and violence. It's a complete breakdown of any civil society. It is nothing but anger and hate. And by the way, haven't you ever noticed how all of these instances of racism, that they claim with, the police shootings, And of course, there's a lot of instances in which the left pulls off fake hate crimes in order to try and drum up a narrative and drum up, the idea that there is racism left in this country, when the only racists left in the country are the Democrats. And they're not even doing it because they actually believe anything about race. They're just doing it in order to keep us distracted. But have you ever noticed where things are worst for minorities? Democrats are in control. So yeah, this right here was just a perfect example of what the Democrats are getting away with, how they are enriching themselves at everyone else's expense, and why their policies are just designed to keep us distracted. Because if we were paying attention, this type of crap would not be allowed to happen. This type of crap would be stopped. We would be demanding the resignation of crooked politicians such as Nancy Pelosi. They wouldn't be able to get away with it, but they're only able to get away with it because you're not paying attention. You're letting them divide and distract us. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at one final clip here. It is just so sad.
Now to the battle over the future of the Supreme Court. Former President Trump speaking out, saying Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is, quote, helpless against considerations by President Biden to expand the number of Supreme Court justices serving on the bench. The president also saying in a statement that if and when this happens, I hope the justices remember the day they didn't have the courage to do what they should have done for America.
As predicted, we know that the Democrats are going to want to pack the courts. They need to, because they violate the Constitution all the time. And the only check on the Democrats right now is the judicial branch. But, there's so many judicial activists, left-wing activists, that basically undermine the Constitution in order to implement a political ideology. However, with the Trump administration having been so successful, has appointed a lot of judges to the courts. And so there is no guarantee that they will get a liberal judge in order to basically rubber stamp whatever unconstitutional act that the Democrats want. And we stated, because as the Democrats, had informed us, they planned on packing the courts. And the court that they really want to pack the most is the Supreme Court. Now, we tried informing the Supreme Court that that's what the Democrats plan to do, as we tried to get them to do their damn job, as it related to all of the fraud that we saw in the 2020 election. Or all the irregularities, as YouTube demands that we not actually discuss the truth of what happened in the 2020 election, or the truth about the illegitimacy of the Biden administration. But yeah, because the courts failed to do their jobs and failed to actually take a look at the illegal and unconstitutionally conducted elections in violation of state laws in numerous states, the Democrats are now in a position to try and pack the courts. And the courts would be helpless unless, the courts, in their own self-preservation decided that packing the courts was unconstitutional. Of course, I'm not sure they really have the authority or the backbone to do so. Now, Trump tried to warn that, yes, the Democrats would pack the courts. And of course, he didn't really need much warning, considering the Democrats were bragging about how they plan to do just that. And right now, they are trying to put together a plan in order to pack the courts. And if they get away with packing the courts, then there is absolutely no check left on the Democrats' ability to just violate the Constitution. I mean, you even have Joe Biden out there right now trying to say no amendment to the Constitution is absolute, which is a complete farce. They are absolute, which is why they're in the Constitution in writing with very specific language. It's not saying this is what we recommend the government does, but the government can just choose to ignore the Constitution if it becomes inconvenient to their desire for power. So yes, it is going to be a sad day, because right now, American democracy is hanging on by a thread. The Constitution barely exists, as nobody in DC tends to uphold, respect the Constitution, or even honor their oath of office. And if the courts get packed and we lose the courts completely, not that the courts are really abiding by the Constitution and a lot of their rulings to begin with, but the Supreme Court is supposedly 5-4 majority Republicans. And no, it's not 6-3, because John Roberts is a liberal Democrat. All right, so because it's supposedly a constitutional majority, even though that constitutional majority didn't really, have any intentions or any will to actually uphold the Constitution in 2020, at least, I guess for the most part, they will do the constitutional thing more often than not. But the Democrats seek to destroy that. That way, they can always appeal everything up to the Supreme Court. So if they do get an actual judge in the lower courts that actually goes by what the Constitution says and strikes down their unconstitutional acts, they can just go to the Supreme Court, where they can just decide to pack it, where it all of a sudden becomes 10-5 liberal judges. And then you can forget about any Constitution, because there won't be any. You can forget about any election integrity, because there won't be any. Democracy is over. If the Democrats get their way, there is no democracy. We are an overthrown democracy, and now dissolves into a banana republic. The courts could have stopped this dystopian nightmare, and instead, they chose not to act. Sad. And I agree with Trump. I don't think Mitch McConnell has the backbone. I mean, everyone wants to go off and try and claim that, yes, it's Cocaine Mitch. Cocaine Mitch strikes. Cocaine Mitch doesn't do jack squat. He is a spineless politician who rolls over for the Democrats almost every single time. He is one of the first people to try and sell out the country and sell out the Constitution and sell out the Republicans at every possible turn, because at his core, at his heart, Mitch McConnell is a liberal Democrat. He has no intention of fighting. He's still operating as if this was 30, 40 years ago, believing that the Democrats have any interest in compromise or have any sanity left. He just doesn't, he won't recognize the Democrats for who they are today. And so he won't stand up to them. He'll just, roll over, claim to be powerless, and then say, hey, if you want to stop them, just vote more Republicans. And see, here's where I think some of the con is in somebody like Mitch McConnell. So he'll go off and he'll roll over for the Democrats. He'll sell out to the Democrats at every opportunity. He doesn't do so because he actually believes in the Democrat cause. He doesn't do so because he, believes in left-wing ideology. I don't think he really believes in anything except for his own power. And he knows that the crazier the left gets, and the more he lets them get away with anything that they want to do while they're in power, the more of a backlash there will be in the next election. So the quicker he sells us out and lets the left take over, the sooner the backlash and the bigger the backlash will be, so that he gets his Senate majority leader status back. Now, when he's the majority leader, does he ever move or take any action to undo any of these left-wing ideologies? No. Does he do anything to try and repeal these laws? No. So he lets the Democrats go through and implement these laws because he knows it's going to benefit him being restored to the Senate majority leader, the crazier the Democrats get, because of the backlash, but has absolutely zero intentions of undoing what the Democrats do. So the Democrats get their way. And then Mitch McConnell gets to be in the leadership where instead of rolling back and undoing the liberal insanity, he just slows it down to a more comfortable pace. And that's the big problem with the Republican establishment. They don't fight for anything conservative or republicanism. They don't have any intentions on stopping the liberal insanity. They're only concerned at the pace at which the country is declining. It's trying to manage the decline rather than stop it. Trying to manage the Democrats' destruction of the country instead of stopping it. It's really sad. All of this could have been avoided just simply by enforcing the Constitution. And actually, going by and letting people have a free and fair election. All of the disaster that we have seen since Biden was installed in the White House was easily avoidable. Instead, we got a dumpster fire with the country rapidly declining because we got a bunch of hate America, side with Iran's death to America crowd Democrats in control of the country. And is it any wonder if you put people who publicly express how much they hate the country in charge, that the country rapidly descends into a dumpster fire? All right, so that's it for this episode. If you found this on YouTube, well, that's a shocker, but go ahead and click follow, the subscribe button. But I'd prefer you follow me over on Rumble. If you're catching this on the audio version of the show, and this is your first time listening, go ahead and, follow the audio podcast as well. Go ahead and share this all over social media, so long as the link to the show doesn't get blocked, which unfortunately I'm sure it will, and on quite a few platforms. So thank you so much, and I will be back again soon.